Can you believe Josh Brolin is Thanos? Let's review the Goonies. The Goonies stars Sean Astin, Corey Feldman, Josh Brolin, Cary Green, and is directed by Richard Donner. You know, I never realized that Richard Donner directed this. That's crazy. But anyway, yeah, it's time for the Goonies, guys. This is another patron request. This is going to be for Zach. He requested this movie, and I've been excited to do this one. And I'm gonna put my cards on the table here for you guys first of all, okay? I'm an 80s nut. I love, not just horror, I love 80s movies, and I really loved that Steven Spielberg, style of action and comedy. He had a good mix of all different types of genres in his movies. He wrote this. He wrote The Goonies. But he didn't write it. The story was Steven Spielberg's. Christopher Columbus wrote it. But one thing, like I said earlier, is I never realized that Richard Donner actually directed this. Because when I'm watching this movie, it feels like a Spielberg movie. Kind of like Poltergeist is a Tobe Hooper movie, but it feels like a Spielberg movie. So when I went back and did my research, I found out that Spielberg actually was like an assistant director or a second unit director on this. So a lot of this movie feels like, Spielberg. He had a thing with those, I guess the zoom-ins, the slow zoom-ins and the close-ups. Spielberg had a certain style to his directing, okay? Some of the scenes in this movie definitely felt like that. Not saying Spielberg directed all the movie. This is Richard Donner's baby, and I'm sure he did at least 75% of it, but definitely has that Spielberg stamp. But like I was saying with cards on the table, I'm not like a Goonies fanatic. I love the movie. I remember watching it on HBO when it first came out, and it does have an infectious feel to it. Cindy Lauper always stayed with me. Still this day, I can't get that song. It just sounds like fun and energetic. Even though the movie doesn't take place in summer, it actually takes place in the fall. But I've always felt like Goonies was a summer movie just because that's when I saw it. I saw it in the summer. It has kind of a summer vibe to it, anyway, for me. But it was filmed in Astoria, a real place, Astoria, where the actual place in the movie is called Astoria. Going way up the coast, and they kind of found the town by accident because Richard Donner and the crew, and Spielberg, they were all looking for a place to film the movie. And they ended up just stopping off along the way for the night, and when they noticed the sun coming up in the morning and they saw how beautiful the area was, they realized this is where we have to film the movie. So that's why I think locations can also have a deep imprint on a movie, and The Goonies is one of those places where it's instantly recognizable because of the location, the house that's in the movie. And I think that just adds something extra to any film. If you can film it in a very recognizable location that will last forever, then that's just awesome. But anyway, quick plot synopsis on The Goonies, even though I'm sure everybody here has seen The Goonies. It's one of those movies I never really paid attention to what the plot is. All I knew was that this group of kids went on this treasure hunt because there's this pirate by the name of One-Eyed Willie from, I want to say, the 1600s. He left this map. And so our main character, Mikey, played by Sean Astin, he finds the map in his attic. The reason he goes on this trip is because, and this is the part that I didn't know or didn't realize, is his home is going to be taken over, foreclosed, because a lot of times these major corporations, I'm holding my mind, I don't know why I'm doing that, but a lot of times these corporations, they will take over an entire run of houses and just build these shopping plazas or whatever. And so these families end up being without, unless they come up with a large sum of money. My grandmother was actually in this situation, and she said, hell no, I'm not going. So they could not get my grandmother's house. And so I've always thought about the Goonies with this story. My grandmother had this house and this huge bypass that just went over. And when you go over the bypass in Mississippi, this little bitty house is there. And that's my grandmother's. She's no longer with us anymore, but her house still is. Hell yeah. Go Gramps. Richard Donner assembled the perfect group of children and teenagers for this movie, because that's what this is. All the main characters, the protagonists are children. And the villains are very much like what you would see in a Home Alone movie. As a matter of fact, I would even wager that Home Alone probably took a lot of influence from this movie. And Christopher Columbus directed Home Alone. Am I right on that? I think so. But every single child actor and teenager in this movie, they gel so well together. You had Sean Astin as Mikey. He acts as the leader, because I don't care how young you are, you still have to have a leader in the group. Every member of the group has a certain quality about them. Mikey being the leader. Then you have Corey Feldman, who plays this kid Mouth, because he just won't shut up. And he's just really cocky and arrogant, but they don't go too far with it. That's the trick here, is you gotta keep the character likable. And I think Corey Feldman, this is one of his best roles. All of those roles that Feldman did in the 80s when he was a child, I thought he nailed. Even in Stand By Me. He was a really underrated actor back in the day, and I don't think people gave Feldman the props that he deserved. He had that something, that it factor that locked you into him, no matter what role he did back then. And I know Corey Feldman went through a lot back in the 80s, and I think that's part of it. I think you could kind of sense a little bit of frustration within. Maybe I'm wrong on this, let me know in the comments, but I could sense that there was some depth there to this child in real life, not just the characters that he played. Then Ke Huy Quan played Data, who was also in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Another one of those child actors that just very memorable. And then lastly, but definitely not least, you had Chunk, played by Jeff Cohen. Chunk steals the show in every single scene that he's in, and this probably was the child actor that had the least amount of experience.
I want you to spill your guts, tell us everything.
Let me do a summer camp for fat kids, and then once during lunch I got nuts, and I pigged out, and they kicked me out.
But Jeff Cohen had perfect comedic timing in every scene that he did, and really, he gets most of the comedy. You could have these scenes with these actors and they're funny, but as soon as Chunk comes in, it's like another layer of comedy is just like poured over the top of everything, and it trumps everything. And some of the most memorable lines from the movie to this day are from Chunk. It's funny, when you think of like the Monster Squad, the Wolfman's Got Nards was from a similar character like Chunk. It was the kid that was chubby. And really the Goonies is just moments, this journey. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And all these children reacting with each other and throwing in these teenagers in the mix that have these hormones raging, and a very young Josh Brolin. And Cary Green, who played Andy, looks so much like Jamie Gertz from The Lost Boys that I just can't stand it. But it's interesting when you put two different groups of adolescents together. It's like different stages of adolescence. When you're the age of the younger children, I think they're like maybe 12, something like that. You haven't hit like puberty yet, but of course that's a little bit of that is there. And then when you're like the teenager and your hormones are raging, when you mix all that together, you have fun moments like when Mikey gets pulled into a kissing scene with Andy. And she doesn't know it's Mikey, she thinks it's his brother, Brand, Josh Brolin. Really fun moments. And another thing that works about this, and I kind of hinted on this earlier, is that every character in this, they all have a moment in the movie, a moment to shine. Like I was talking about Andy, the scene with the piano. And it's a dangerous scene because if she doesn't play the keys just right, then the floor will drop out. So that was her one moment. Like if she didn't step up to the plate, then they were all gonna die. And there's so many moments like that throughout this movie. Every character has a moment to shine. Mouth, he is the character that speaks Spanish. And there's a really funny scene at the beginning when he's talking to the maid, and he's saying stuff that kids normally wouldn't get away with today in a PG movie. It's hilarious.
It's the attic. Mr. Walsh doesn't like anybody up here, ever. I guess that's why it's always open.
That's just something about the 80s too back then, is you could get away with a lot more than you can now. Nobody was worried about stepping on toes or hurting feelings. You know, they let the story take front and center and let the chips fall where they may. And I think that's the best form of filmmaking. And then you got to talk about Sloth. This was a 6'5" former NFL football player. And there's just this beautiful relationship. It's kind of like, and we've seen this I mean, this is pretty much like King Kong, his bride, you know? A child and his pet giant. But John Matuszak, who plays Sloth, he had it the roughest because this guy had to come in like 4 hours before everybody else just to put on all that makeup. And there was one scene where Richard Donner, he was telling the kids, whatever you do, don't get water on his makeup because they'll have to redo it. And of course, I believe it was Chunk who did it too, which is hilarious because it's like art imitating life and imitating art. The guy had to go and redo the whole scene. Come back in the next day, 4 hours of makeup, redo the whole scene, you know, but it took it like a champ. But it's all worth it, you know, because 30 years later, hell, for a lifetime, 100 years, people are still going to be talking about the Goonies because of those characters, because of those great moments. It's like a time capsule. Yeah, I'm sure these actors like Sean Astin and Corey Feldman, they look back on this time period in their lives very fondly. You know, I mean, not every day that you get to be in a Steven Spielberg production because you know it's going to be quality. And the Goonies lives on because of how, I guess, unapologetic that it is, you know. This was how it was back then. You know, this is how young children talked. You could take it a step further with Stand By Me, which is rated R, rightfully so, but even at that young of an age, that's how children talk. You know, that's just part of life. And there's no sugarcoating it. Even though this movie's PG, like I said, back then, PG, you could get away with a lot more. And by the way, this movie was 1985, which is probably one of the best years for movies because you had this, you had Teen Wolf, you had Back to the Future, you had Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and there's so many more I could go on. 1985 was like a landmark year for movies. Now, I do have a bone to pick with the Goonies. Like I said, I'm not a Goonies fanatic, even though when it's on, like last night I watched it with my wife and we were having a ball with the movie. But one thing that did stick out to me that I noticed, Joe Pantoliano, or Joey P as they like to call him, who's been in so many movies like, you know, The Matrix, Eddie and the Cruisers, I could go on and on and on. I think he doesn't really have much of an active voice in this movie as an actor. He's more reactionary to everything that he does. And I think that's why I always forget that he's in this movie because everything that I watch with Joey P, he always sticks out. In The Matrix, he really sticks out. You know, Ignorance is Bliss, stuff like that. Eddie and the Cruisers, he always makes a stamp in every movie that he did. Hell, even Memento. So it pains me that in this movie, he doesn't really do much. He's kind of reduced to a bumbling idiot. Him and his brother, they're constantly fighting with their mother. And they're pretty much like the Home Alone villains, you know, that are they're the butt of the joke. They're fun for this movie though, so I can't take that away from them. But I wish it was somebody else besides Joey P because I'm a big Joey P fan and I wanted him to have more to play with. But to Richard Donner's credit, he cast him and Robert Davi to type because they both in real life didn't like each other. And the characters don't like each other, so the chemistry's there for sure. But to me, as far as Joey P goes, it's not his most memorable role. You know, the Goonies belongs to the kids, but the Goonies will live on forever. So I'm giving the Goonies a high purchase worthy for sure. You know, it's a classic. Not taking anything away from it, just being completely objective here. But it was so fun watching this movie again last night. Had a blast. Such an 80s stamp. Like I said earlier, I want to do more 80s reviews, okay? And I might just do it. Screw it. I love talking about 80s movies. They're so fun. Maybe I'll do like a complete 80s month. Like November's usually my like what I call epic movie month anyway. I like to watch like you know, big blockbuster type movies, fun, yeah, even 80s movies. So yeah. Maybe I'll continue that trend throughout the holidays. Let me know your thoughts on Goonies down in the comments, guys. Also, be sure to come up to Killer Flicks where we talk horror all day and every day on Fridays. We do Free for Fridays. Support me on Patreon. Buy me a coffee. And by the way, this will be the very last review, marking this date, in my Evil Lair room in my house in Melbourne. The next review that I do will be in Orlando in the new house. Because all this, the rest of it is coming down. So I guess it's really cool that it's the Goonies though. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Drumdum out.